Good to see you again.
All right, so I think we'll just get started. This is Ed Pacheco. Many of you already know Ed. Ed used to be a state representative from Burrillville. He was a member of the Progressive Caucus. One of his distinctions is he was, I believe, one of only 4 people to vote against the Murphy-Carcieri tax cuts in 2006. And after that, he was chair of the Democratic Party, which is our party. And now he is running for Secretary of State.
Appreciate that. That's a great introduction. Thank you very much. Yeah, good company on that flat tax vote, by the way. Myself, Art Handy, Joe Almeida, and Edie Ajel, the only 4 Democrats in the House of Representatives to vote against the flat tax. So I took my cues from the smarter people in the chamber, which was the 3 of them. So I did well by sitting next to Art and Edie throughout at least 4 of my years in the General Assembly, and then subsequently moving just 1 row over, but keeping tabs, at least them keeping tabs on me in that regard. So I think for the most part I've met a good number of you in this room, but you know, everyone, I don't want to take it for granted everybody knows who I am, so I'll just give you a little backdrop. As already introduced, Ed Pacheco. I've been in public office now my entire adult life. And for those who don't know me, I actually first ran for office when I was a junior going into my senior year of high school. It was actually kind of a fluke, so to speak. I was, as many of you may have done when you were in high school, I was in line for the voter registration drive. A few of my friends were joking about Ed Pacheco for town council. And it was nothing more than that. It really was just a bantering back and forth between myself, Ryan Legacy, and Josh Doobie, and Matt Menard, and a few other guys who were in line. Well, the next morning, I had all of the TV news stations show up at my door with a camera in my face asking me if I was running for town council. So, 30 days out from the 2000 presidential election, I was running as a write-in candidate for town council in the great town of Burrillville. I didn't win that election. I was a write-in candidate. I lost by a few hundred votes to a gentleman who later became a good friend of mine, Louis Blywise. He won the last seat on the council, was 76 years old at the time when he won that seat. I would just turn 18 years of age. And I think I received was 786 write-in votes. I'd have to go back and look to be exact, but I was fortunate because that was probably the most fun campaign I had ever been a part of in my entire political career. And we lost. But the best part about it was the sense of engagement. Not just the sense of it, but the real sense of ownership that the 70, 80 of my classmates came out to knock on doors, make phone calls. Frankly, we had no idea what we were doing, but we tried it. And we stuffed flyers in newspaper boxes, doorways, any place we could get flyers out to people to start the conversation about a new generation of leadership in the town of Burrillville. Well, as the campaign went on, it became less and less about Ed Pacheco and more about the future of our community. That sense of idealism is the same idealism I carry with me today, almost 15 years later, having run for office for the first time as going into my senior year of high school. I should mention that those 700 plus people that wrote my name in for council also thought it was good to write my name in for the Burrillville School Board. So 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I became the youngest elected official in the entire state after the chairman of the school board stepped down and I became the next highest vote getter. I went on to run for re-election a year later and would subsequently be re-elected the top vote getter out of 14 candidates. I became vice chair, then chair before the age of 23, overseeing a $33 million budget. I also want to mention, as a member of that school board, we not only negotiated a teacher's contract, but we gave our teachers a raise and brought them to the middle of the pack so they were being paid fair and equitably for the good work that they've done over the course of their tenure. On top of the fact that the people that I was so grateful for, because they instilled in me, as did my mother, that there are 2 things that are essential in our lifetimes to help you to be successful. 1 is hard work, and 2 is a good public education, and I'm a product of both of those things. I should mention, all at the same time that this was happening, I was living on Section 8 and on food stamps, and I would go on to become the first person in my immediate family to graduate from college with the assistance of a Pell Grant. And during my years in college, I would eventually take up the baton to run for state representative against an incumbent who, frankly, just wasn't getting the job done. It wasn't a matter of he was a bad guy or we had, indifferences. There were things that were, unfortunately, that Burrillville being crippled by, not the least of which was a pilot, tax treaty situation that unfortunately was hampering us and costing the town upwards of $500,000 to $700,000 a year. So I made it my mission as the chair of the school board at the time to run for the office to raise the issue. I go on to win, and then ultimately became a state representative. And I'll tell you what, at the age of 23, almost 24 years old, going into the state house, could be a little intimidating. I thought the school board was a learning curve, but the state house was a little bit more of a learning curve, to say the least. But I'll tell you, someone who grew up in the town of Burrillville and experiencing life, through my eyes and the experiences I had at a very young age, I also had a better appreciation for some of the things that I would confront over the course of my time in public service, and ultimately going into work into the nonprofit sector to help kids who are disadvantaged get a better education for their futures. During my time in the General Assembly, I fought for things, as we already talked about, I voted against a flat tax. Every time we had a minimum wage increase, I voted for a minimum wage increase. Every time we were having a debate on whether or not we were going to cut state worker jobs or put people to work, I voted to put people to work. When it came down to on the side of issues pertaining to same-sex marriage, coming from a district representing Burrillville, Gloucester, where I'm a Catholic and we have 5 Catholic churches, I was a code sponsor from day one on same-sex marriage as a freshman. And my passion for public service didn't stop there. When I was asked to consider taking up the baton to run for chairman of the State Democratic Party, I looked at it as an opportunity, not because I wanted the title, and frankly not because I wanted the work, because we all know there's a lot of work to be done. But I also recognized that a lot of times in life when we're faced with a decision such as that, we have to ask ourselves, if not us, who else? And I decided to take on that task of becoming the chair because I believe in the sense of ideals, while recognizing that the big tent or the big umbrella, as it's come to be, is important. I also understand that there are principles that the party needs to uphold and stand by no matter what anyone has to say or what direction we believe we have to go in. I am the face of Section 8. I am the face of a Pell Grant. I am the face of public education. I am all those things and more, and so aren't the hundreds of thousands of Rhode Islanders all across this great state. When somebody asked me what I wanted to run for Secretary of State, it was very easy for me. I want to make sure that each and every Rhode Islander has the opportunity to exercise their right to vote. When I was faced with issues such as voter ID and other issues that came across my desk, I didn't just vote against voter ID once, I voted against it twice. When we were talking about closing the polls early from 9 p.m. till 8 p.m., I voted against it. When we talked about decreasing the amount of polling locations that were available to voters all across Rhode Island, I voted against it. Many of these decisions weren't based on anything else other than cost savings measures, and at best, didn't save enough to make a huge difference in budgets at the municipal or the state level. At the end of the day, if we sacrifice our fundamental right as American citizens to get out and exercise our right to vote, we're sacrificing something much more than any piece of paper or any dollar bill that comes into any one of our pockets or in the state coffers or any business for that matter. And ultimately, thank you. and ultimately, if we're going to be successful as a state, we're going to be successful as a country, we need everyone to be able to come to the table. I believe in more access. I believe the window of opportunity to become involved in your government starts with the Secretary of State in Rhode Island. And also, accountability starts with the Secretary of State in Rhode Island. You know, we look at the last few election cycles, in particular this last election, I sat back a few times and said to myself, I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with my counterparts in the Republican Party and the Moderate Party because we have an incompetent executive director and Bob Cando at the Board of Elections. We need leadership, but we also need accountability, and that accountability comes from the fact that making sure our Board of Elections and our Secretary of State can work in tandem, not be separate, and to the extent whereas that there's no reason on paper or for any other reason to work together. And you know what some of you may have read, I wrote an op-ed right after the election last year talking about some of these very things. And that's where it's predicated from. We need people that are capable, have the expertise, and also understand the importance is exercising that right to vote. And believe me when I say, I found out at an early age how powerful that really can be. Every time someone talked about the Al Gore presidential election and the difference of 400 some odd votes between him and George W. Bush, I kind of, to me, the difference for me was a couple hundred votes and being on the council. Imagine if my name didn't have to be written in. Imagine if the arrow could have been crossed. Imagine if the conversation had started more than 30 days prior to that election. I don't know if the results would have been different, but I do know this. It sparked a flame in my personal, who I am as a person, that public service isn't about just another job, but it's about who I am as an individual. And I'm going to fight every day that I'm able to walk, on this God's green earth to make sure that I live by the philosophy that I've always lived by, that we have to leave this world better than we found it. And that what happens to the kids, as the president has said on multiple occasions, on the south side of Providence, or in my backyard in Burrillville, it matters to me. So I'll leave it open for questions.
I should let somebody else go first. I went first the last time.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. Am I
Shoot.
allowed to do a couple of questions?
Fine by me.
The first one that
I'd like to see somebody stop you.
the first one I have to ask you, which because I've been pushing very hard on the voter ID issue
Sure.
and testified at the General Assembly and things, as well as some other people who did. But this has been my really strong feeling about it. And we went and got signatures. We actually delivered close to 2,000 signatures in only 15 days that we collected them. We delivered them to the governor's office, and we delivered them to Speaker Fox's office, and and we were essentially blown off. So what I want to know is, first of all, you have the I have the op-ed article that you wrote.
Yep.
And I thought that it was very good. There are a couple of things that I would say. My question is, why didn't you put voter ID into this? Have you heard about the problems?
Go ahead. Nope, go ahead. Are you done the question? I don't want to interrupt.
So no, my first question, why didn't you put the voter ID into this article?
Well, I only get so many words, so that's first off.
Okay.
Second, the issues that were presented to me as the chair at the time, I was not reflecting necessarily on the voter ID issue in particular. I was just talking about in generalities. And when we were talking about some of our legal folks that were dealing with some of the challenges at the local polling locations, it had more to do with other issues than voter ID. And I wouldn't suggest that that's a case study or research in particular. This was my reflection at the time, immediately after the election. So I wouldn't say that it was an absence of any issues surrounding voter ID.
Okay. So I guess the second, I have a suggestion, which probably other people have said, but I won't.
Sure.
So the second question is, you give a wonderful speech, and I really salute you, and I know that you're really, it's genuine. It comes across as being very genuine.
I appreciate
However,
that.
you've been chairman of the Democratic Party, and you're an insider in what I consider to be one of the most diffuse and rainbow party political spectrum of any Democratic Party in the country,
Sure.
including John Brien, who was an ALEC member, chairman of ALEC. So I'm wondering how you said there are the principles for democratic principles which you hold up. How can you I'm wondering, you come, you're chairman. What did you, we have Dinos, quite a few Dinos in the Democratic Party. And as as chairman of the party, how did you deal with that?
Sure. Well, I guess the easy answer is when you're chair of the party, this is one of the things I struggle with personally because, again, I would tend to identify with those members of our party that are more left, right? I mean, that immediately off the bat. But I recognize as chair, that wasn't just my decision. I can't dictate as to who will and will not be a particular candidate. There's a process by which, as a chair of the party, was my job to uphold. Mm-hmm. And when it came time for primary season or the discussion of who should run and who shouldn't run, I mean, I'll give you for an example. Much to the chagrin of a number of people, we gave Voter Activation Network, which is a software the party has, availability to all candidates when I first became chair of the party. Now, I was chastised by some members of the party, but for me, I looked at that and said, no, hold on a second. In particular, the race in 2010 was the congressional seat. You know, obviously David Cicilline, Bill Lynch, and so on and so forth. And people were saying, well, why don't you just give it to the endorsed candidate and not give it to anyone else? Well, my attitude was, no, they're all Democrats. And ultimately, my job isn't to pick and choose necessarily who ultimately will be the nominee. That is the decision on behalf of the primary voters. Mm-hmm. My job is to get whoever wins that primary elected in November. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that, and it, you know, I understand because I heard it from both sides, right? I knew I was doing a good job because I had people on the right that were upset with me and I had people on the left who were upset with me. And I looked at it and I said, you know, that's the most difficult part of being a referee in this particular case, is trying to articulate a message on behalf of the party while at the same time not appearing to come down, you know, hardline on one particular candidate versus another. And I will say that to the extent that that also meant also being respectful of who was the endorsed candidate or who was the incumbent. You know, again, going back to the congressional seat is the easiest one I can give you. When David was running for re-election and Anthony Gemma decided to challenge him, I did not support or help Anthony Gemma in any way, shape, or form because he was the incumbent congressman and was the endorsed candidate going to that election. And that would be like us, you know, saying for, you know, I heard from so many people, you know, Jeremy Kapstein when he ran against Elizabeth Roberts, or this one who when they ran against, you know, I didn't support Jeremy Kapstein. He had the opportunity to come and speak before the meeting. We gave him access to talk with all the members of the party. But ultimately, Elizabeth Roberts was lieutenant governor, and we had worked so hard to get her elected. So it's not as easy as being clear-cut or black and white. It's more a matter of being a defender of the process. And I know that's not the most popular thing to say, but that's what that job calls for. At the same time of committing oneself to making sure that you promote good Democratic candidates, and we did that. And if anyone looks at the results between 2010 and 2012, you can start to see the momentum shift on where Democrats in the primaries are starting to go. I made sure that my staff, my team and I worked very hard to get as many Democrats engaged in the voting process, more so than I believe that previously had been done. And I think ultimately that led to good things on behalf of the party.
That's a very respectful answer, and I really appreciate that. I think I had one more, and that is, so what would your approach be to, there were certain things that you talked about, voter ID and other things, and they, certainly I agree with you on keeping the cap on, you know, going back to the voter polling.
Increasing the number of polls, yeah.
Because it was horrible. The one thing I will say to you is that I was in Pawtucket and we had 3 pages of polling, you know, of balloting. But the division, and I saw this because I was working for Cicilline and White House running poll numbers, and what I saw was, as much as anything, was the way the lineup was, the alphabet was broken down, so that the A to whatever was huge, and then the other group was very small. And so you had all these huge lines, and there needs to be some flexibility in how they're, so there are structural things besides this, but I agree with you certainly about the...
Well, to answer your question you were asking earlier, it's a multi-tiered effort. One is education. 2 is accountability and collaboration between the Board of Elections, Secretary of State's office, and 3 is legislation. And you have all three of those things have to happen in order to correct some of the problems that we're talking about.
And so how would you go about
Well, obviously, I would introduce legislation pertaining to the polling locations and the times.
And
And-
voter ID?
And I would be happy to support a voter ID legislation and work with Teresa Tanzi, Maria Siemeni, and others on the House side, and of course on the Senate side, Josh Miller and others to get legislation through. It's not going to be easy. I mean, we all know that. The numbers are against us in both those chambers, and I think it's a matter of...
Speaker Fox is absolutely adamant that he will not change it for anything. So, you know.
Well, my goal in any of these situations, and the best example I can give is marriage equality. You can't win this by chastising people, you have to win it through education. I mean, most people in Rhode Island, when you talk about voter ID or talk about voter suppression, their eyes glaze over because they have no idea what that means. But the reality is, in other parts of the country, voter suppression is real. And Rhode Island has added, food to the fodder in reference to giving the debate, for all intents and purposes, leverage. And when they're talking about voter ID, and I think that should matter to people here in Rhode Island. And when you create a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, I can't tell you how many times on the House floor I heard it, that Democrats were creating a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, yet when you flip-flopped it the other way, it made sense to them. And I know Democrats came down on both sides of that issue, but ultimately I think it's education. I think education is the way to promote that issue from becoming a
They're
problem.
giving me the sign, and I will respect that. I'm going to say one more thing, and that is that when I went with the petition that we wrote, when I went to Kennedy Plaza,
Yeah.
not to the shopping malls, but to Kennedy Plaza,
Sure.
and worked that, within 40 minutes I had 20 signatures, because the people said, I know exactly what they're doing. So, thank you very much.
No problem. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, first, I wanted to thank you for defending the process back in the 2010 and 2012 elections. I know that as a campaign manager back in 2010, I was worried about, is the party going to favor the establishment candidate? And I was very pleased with how you did your job, and also how you did your job when attending, the Warwick Democratic City Committee meetings, being able to first speak your role as the leader of the party, and then on controversial issues, you were able to, first speaking as the leader of the party, and then when asked your personal opinion, you were clear in differentiating your position and your personal belief. And I guess related to that, as a Secretary of State, I see it as a statewide office that can really speak and use that platform on multiple issues outside of those strictly relating to the job of Secretary of State. Speaking on matters of education, everything that's a really hot topic issue these days, say pension reform, and whatever issues come to the surface. Do you see yourself as really using that statewide position in order to speak out on the multitude of these issues?
Absolutely. I mean, look, when you're in elected office, I hate to use the word power. It makes me feel like there's something wrong with that. But the power of an office is the bully pulpit, and being able to utilize the standard, by which you hold in that office also gives you an opportunity and a platform by which to exercise your opinion on something. I mean, I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, I can point to numerous issues where I can pretty much guarantee you the majority of the members of the state committee would not have supported me on, but I wasn't going to shy away from who I was as a Democrat, nor was I going to be a hypocrite. Master Lover is a perfect example. I'm sure if you haven't already discussed it or you don't already know, I'm for the repeal of the Master Lever. And it goes back to my tenure as a member of the school board, a nonpartisan, duly elected school board, where I saw such a significant drop-off between the state rep and state senate and the council candidates, all of which were partisan, and then you turn to the school board and you'd have anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 votes short of what they were receiving in their respective offices, and they were dealing with a budget that was 3 times as much as the council was dealing with. And it wasn't because people didn't understand what they were voting for. People genuinely thought they were voting for me as a Democrat because I was supported by the Democratic Town Committee, I was campaigning as a Democrat, but ultimately if they pulled that master lever and they assumed they voted for me, their vote was being taken away from them. You know, so whether we repeal the master lever or we do it through education, a course correction has to be taken. Because right now, just to simply say that I want the master lever because it helps Democrats being elected, I don't have to hide behind the master lever. I'm proud of the principles by which I stand for. I'm proud of the philosophies by which I stand for. If I'm going to get elected, I'm going to get elected because I'm the best candidate for the job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to know, you spoke a couple of times about helping to coordinate better with the Board of Elections, so there's not as much confusion between the Secretary of State's office and the Board of Elections. Could you say more specifically about what kind of issues you want to coordinate on, how you could manage to achieve that better?
Yeah, sure. Well, it starts, for me, there's two options to change the way things are right now. And I'm the type of person I put all my cards on the table for better or worse. And I would suggest that the Secretary of State either have the power of nomination of those members of the Board of Elections, or he or she serve as the chair of that board.
Yes.
Which would allow for, differential between the two bodies to the point where they would still have their integrity maintained. You wouldn't have a full politically elected individual co-opting a particular branch that should have some level of autonomy, but at the same time making sure that there's some type of consecration between those two and actually working together. And what I mean by that is right now, as it pertains to our election cycle, excuse the football reference because I was doing this all day yesterday watching football, but literally the Secretary of State, is the quarterback carrying the football to the 5-yard line, and then you're handing it off to the Board of Elections, and if they score, they score. If they don't, they don't. And when we walk up and down Main Street, we ask everyday citizens of Rhode Island, the election didn't go so well yesterday the way it was administered. Who do you blame for that? Well, I hate to break to everybody, it's not the Board of Elections. They don't even know who those people are. More times than not, they think the Secretary of State, if they, understand or represent who that person is, and then ultimately they think of the governor. How many people in Rhode Island do we really understand that the governor has the power of nomination for the Board of Elections? Probably not many people. But ultimately, we need to make sure that those two are working in tandem. And I think that, whether it be the actual coordination or management of election day, for example, when it comes to ballots, when they are actually transported from downtown to the respective municipalities, the best people to empower in reference to the coordination are our local city and town clerks. Who better understands what needs to happen in regards to our local ballots than they do? Yet the Board of Elections kind of exists in its own way, and when it wants to do its job, it does its job. But when it doesn't want to do its job, well, you get the results we've been getting, to the point where you have an executive director who's willing to propose to take the actual the political parties that exist in Rhode Island right now, wanting to remove them from the voter registration card because he said it costs too much money to print them with all the parties listed on it. That's the incompetence that we have at that building.
What do you feel about the paper ballots versus the machine ballots? Do you think that we should convert to that?
Well, I'll tell you, I will always be for a combination of electronic and paper ballot, because the only way you're going to maintain true integrity is making sure you have multiple records. And I think the Scantron system, the one we have right now, is frankly, it's old. When Jimmy Landrigan was Secretary of State, President Clinton, working with the respective states, actually, as a part of the Voter Protection Act, actually appropriated funds for the states to decide how we were going to utilize them. Then Secretary of State Langevin did two things. One, he implemented the Scantron system, and two, he started the Central Voter Registry, which, by the way, the CRV also hampers any chances of any actual voter fraud when we go back to voter ID for a second. Nobody wants to point to that, but at any rate, so we did those two things, and I think that the OptiScan system that we have in place, it's a good one. We just need to update it. The technology we have is almost 20 years old, so we need to appropriate the funds to update that system.
Ed, I'm just going to change things to a different tack, because we've been talking quite a bit about voter ID, which I agree is a very, very important issue. But another part of the Secretary of State's job is, maintaining transparency within a corporate database,
Sure.
as well as trying to implement regulation and push through legislation for the regulation for small businesses, big businesses, medium-sized businesses, whatever it happens to be. What kind of ideas do you have to help businesses in the state of Rhode Island attract them here and help cut through some of the red tape, which notoriously Rhode Island is binned for being over-regulated and thus not competitive with its neighbors in terms of starting businesses, keeping businesses? What are your ideas on that?
Sure, thank you for the question. Well, so there's two ends of the spectrum. There are those folks that are coming here for the first time to set up shop, whether it be coming from out of state or our college students graduating from Brown University or Providence College that are entrepreneurs in spirit and want to, start an incubator of some sort. And then, of course, there's the this Main Street, Rhode Island, Main Street America, that you have these small businesses where folks have owned them for, 20, 30, 40 years, and they're ready to go into retirement. And there's two options that I would like to look at, both of which cost no money to the state of Rhode Island. First off is on the front end. What I would like to see happen is, in both of these instances, I can't take credit for them, I'm not creating them, I actually did my homework and looked at what other states are doing. In the state of New York, when you're a local entrepreneur or someone who wants to start a business, any one of us who's gone through that process, the challenge is that in order to get a bank loan, for example, you need to have capital invested. But if you don't have capital, you can't get the bank loan. And then if you don't have the bank loan, you can't go to the Economic Development Office or Community Development Office, or whatever it is, right? Well, one of the things we don't do a very good job here in Rhode Island, but they do a great job in New York, is their Secretary of State's office makes available a list of, by virtue of an RFP that has actually vetted micro lenders that are available to small businesses and entrepreneurs of upwards of $5,000, right? And if you took, you go to the incubator that's over, near PCTA, where I think there's got to be like 50 or 60, individual businesses that are in there. It's anywhere from internet to medical devices, whatever it is, and it's really fascinating stuff. But these young men and women really struggle to find the financing necessary, especially in this economy, to help get those businesses off the ground. Wouldn't it be great if at the first stop business in the Secretary of State's office, or if we went out to them and made available a list of 10 or 15 vendors that offer microloans that are not interest gouging, that are not, looking to take advantage of people, that just are honest businessmen and women that are looking to help assist. Capital Good Fund is a perfect example in Rhode Island that does these types of loans. We could take advantage of those businesses and promote those businesses right here in Rhode Island and also help other entrepreneurs. And on the latter end, one of the things we don't do a good job is there's no transition opportunity for small businesses. If I'm, in my, mid to late 60s or 70s, and I'm ready to retire, I want to go, I want to spend my time with my family and my grandkids, I might own a local print shop or a bakery, whatever it is, and I've been doing this for the last, 30 plus years, and I might have 5 or 6 employees. Right now, there's not a public option for those business owners to sell that company to the very employees that work for them. I would actually instill a public option for those small business owners to sell the company that they've owned for all those years to the very people that work for them. So in tune, we're not only saving jobs, we're also keeping that business open. And that would be at no cost to the taxpayers.
Thank you.
I was a little unclear on that. You said sell the company to the very people that work for it at no cost to the taxpayers. Where does the capital come from? And then I assume this is going to be a loan that the new owners would have to repay. Where does the capital come from?
Sure. I mean, one of
Built into
the
business.
what's that?
It's built into the
It's built into the business. I mean, when you have, so it's like owning your own home, right? The equity you build up over time, that's your capital. And then take it a step further, if you wanted equity in reference to...
No, I'm asking who, I understand that, but I'm asking who provides the money that the employees are going to use to pay the previous owner.
To sell the business to them?
And I understand, I gather you're saying that that it'll end up being debt on the books of the company, like any buyout, but I'm wondering where's the money come from?
In the state of New York, they actually use the Economic Development Office that actually issues in some cases issues a loan, or they go through private banking in the event that they need equity.
Okay, so which option are you suggesting? Are you suggesting?
I would make both available. I wouldn't hamper anybody to make it economic development or private banking. I'd want the option to be available to those workers. That wouldn't be for me as the Secretary of State to determine for them. I'd want them to know what options are available to them.
Okay, thank you.
You know, again, what you have to understand in reference to the Secretary of State's office is that office should be the hub of communication for businesses in the state of Rhode Island. So this way they don't have to go running all over the place, whether it be DHS, DVR, Division of Taxation, wherever it is. The point of creating First Stop Business, by the way, which started between the shift between Jim Langevin and Eddie Inman. I worked for Eddie Inman when I was in college part-time for the voter initiative. When they started First Stop Business, the point of that was so when you were a small business or a large business, that you could go to one place to get all the information at a central location instead of feeling like you have to call 20 or 30 different people. Well, what we need to do is make sure we emphasize that and empower that. It doesn't necessarily cost more money. It means running things more efficient and effectively and utilizing the time that, you know, look, everything comes down to resources and time. And in reference to state personnel, if we can appropriate their time in a way that's more beneficial to the very taxpayers that are expecting those services, that's what's called leadership. That's what's called management. And when you have an effective person in there, you can do some pretty creative things.
So, what many people don't realize about you is that you actually have a full-time job running a charity. And I wonder if you could talk about what it's like campaigning while you're working at the same time and what we can do to make sure that the elections process doesn't disenfranchise people who can't afford to take off time from working.
Well, I appreciate that. Let me, I'll lay it out there for you. 9 out of 10 people that are looking at this race say I'm the underdog because one of my opponents, I won't name names, has the ability to write a check for any amount of money that that person particularly wants to write. I wish I had that problem. I don't. Matter of fact, I went into the wrong profession to do that. I'm the executive director of a local nonprofit, thank you Sam, that provides experiential learning opportunities for kids K through 12, hands-on education. The point of the philosophy of the organization is that not every child learns by being lectured to or by reading out of a book, but that every child, every person learns by doing. And giving kids, especially disadvantaged kids, the opportunity to experience things that they've never had the opportunity to experience. I'm very proud of the work we do at Education in Action. We've changed the lives of a lot of kids through our Transition Academy and empowered kids with knowledge around financial literacy, civics, and economics through our Exchange City program. But to be honest, to answer your question honestly, it's hard. My priority when I wake up in the morning is I'm a father and I'm a husband. I have a beautiful wife at home that's tolerating me for the time being. And, and I have one beautiful little girl who's 5 years old, and I have a son who literally is due next week. Thank you very much. And so, you know, balancing that along with being executive director, which is not a 40-hour-a-week job, it is a whenever I need to work kind of job. You know, especially with the kids we serve in our Transition Academy, which I should note, that is Providence-based youth. They are high school students with developmental disabilities on the lower end of the spectrum. We work with 20 of them currently and help them basically develop independent and life skills while also doing a career-based assessment on where they would like to be when they grow up and essentially secure them 3 internships over the course of the year. And then prior to the graduation from our program, we help them to secure employment or continue in education. I do the work I do because I love I love my job. But I'll tell you what, if we want to see everyday Rhode Islanders have the ability to run for a statewide office or even state rep or state senate, we need to start addressing the financing of political campaigns in the state of Rhode Island. And the conversation starts with Edie Agelo's legislation, which I was a co-sponsor for many years of my 6 years in the General Assembly. But we need to look at those states such as Connecticut and other states across this country that have the option of public financing for campaigns for 2 reasons. One is I don't want to see the Charlie Fogartys of the world become extinct. Charlie Fogarty was the big cheese, so to speak, when I was first getting in politics up in Burrillville. Burrillville is a part of Fogarty country, as his, Congressman Fogarty and Charlie dubbed it. And I look I look at the landscape we have right now in Rhode Island and across this country, and we're making it incredibly difficult for people that are teachers and police officers, local shop owners, moms, stay-at-home dads, nurses. I mean, we built this state on the backs and the shoulders of everyday Rhode Islanders. That's why we have a citizen legislature. We wanted those people to run for office. We wanted their expertise to be represented around the table, and we're making it harder. We need to take the special interest money out of politics and give people the opportunity to elect the best qualified candidates for the job. And that starts with actually seriously talking about a public option for financing for political campaigns.
Somebody, right?
That's it?
Yeah, so just to follow up there, so what would be your ideas about how that could happen with public financing?
I really like Connecticut, and I that's why I brought up that the governor in Connecticut actually was outspent, I think, either 2 or 3 to 1. His November opponent, he optioned for public financing. And I think ultimately the qualifier is, and it's based on the population of people you'd hope to serve. In Connecticut, it's the number of $5 or $10 contributions you can get incrementally, and there's a threshold you have to achieve, and then you qualify for public financing. And I would say a system such as that here in Rhode Island also makes sense. And the reason why I say that is you don't want just, and I don't mean it to sound this way, but you really don't just want anybody filing for office and then, here you go, you run for state rep, here's $10,000. You gotta make some type of way to quantify or qualify that person to run for office, and whether it be 100 or 200. I think the best way to do it, and this is how I feel about most of these issues. Let's bring in the best of the best experts into Rhode Island, and also sit folks around the table and let's hash this out and really put something concrete, in place. Because look, I watched how the sausage was made for 6 years. And as President Obama said when he first ran for office, I've been there long enough to tell you what works, and I sure as heck can tell you what doesn't work. And when it comes to some of these pieces of legislation, sometimes the worst policies, the reason why they were created is because they were rushed. If we're going to have a serious conversation about public financing, we got to bring in some really capable and intelligent people. And Fair Vote is one of my favorite organizations. I work with them on the pre-registration for 16-year-olds. By the way, my second term in office, I was not only got that introduced and passed, but overrided the governor's veto to get 16-year-olds the ability to pre-register to vote, where we know is going to eventually increase the amount of people that participate in the democratic process here in Rhode Island. But that idea wasn't new to Rhode Island in the sense that we created ourselves. We actually looked at what's working in other states, and we tried to build upon their successes, but also learn from their failures. And I think that's what we'd have to do in this case. It's a very complicated system. It's not something that I would be comfortable just saying, black and white, here's how we're going to do it. I would say, let's look at the states that do it right and bring those people in here and help us write that legislation.
So we have time for just one more question. We have to be out of here by 8:45, so. Anyone have any more questions?
Oh, that time flew by.
Yeah. So it says complicated. What can we do to speed up that process? Like, it seems like there's all these delays and roadblocks to get public financing. Do you think there's anything that can be done to get it through? Why not now? What's the wait?
Well, I think right now, I think the first thing that people talk about is that we don't have the money. I don't remember the last time we had the money for pretty much anything, but I do know this: we have to start prioritizing what matters to us, and I think a part of it starts with having people in elected office that are willing to champion some of the more difficult issues, and I think this is a perfect example. I would tell you that it's not going to just be the Secretary of State; it's going to be supported by whoever the next governor of Rhode Island is. You're going to find support in both chambers. I mean, it's difficult. We made it difficult to pass a law for a reason. You have to build some type of coalition around a particular piece of legislation. I mean, to everybody in this room, if you said to us 8 years ago we should pass marriage equality, everybody in this room, well, that's a no-brainer. But the reality is, it wasn't for a lot of people across the state, and it took a lot of time, and effort and energy. When I was in the legislature, I voted for daycare workers to be unionized when SEIU and Stan Israel fought for that. And I'll tell you what, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, I got more emails and phone calls on that issue than any other issue that I faced in my 6 years in the General Assembly. I mean, I had people chastising me up and down for voting for that bill, but I did it because I believed in people's right to collectively bargain and to organize. And I had to fight for that. So in this particular case, well, going back to that example, and now we got to pass this, and no fanfare and no real debate about it until after the fact, because basically people weren't paying attention to disagree with it, and now they're trying to cry over spilt milk. But the reality is it hasn't hurt anybody, and I don't believe it will. I think actively seeking an option for people to put somebody to work in order to put others to work, if that helps the economy, I think it's a good thing. And I think in this particular case where public financing, going back to that, it's not going to happen overnight. And I wish I wish there was a silver bullet. I really do, because there are a lot of things that I think are a no-brainer. But
yeah, I hear you.
Do you have a preference right now who's running for governor, who you would like to see elected?
oh, that's a loaded question.
I asked him to
Easy crowd.
but just in general.
Here's my political answer, and I'll give you my other answer. I think the Democratic Party is well served to have two very high qualified people running for the nomination of the governor of the state of Rhode Island. I will say
That's your political answer.
but I will say, Angel Tavares is a personal friend of my wife and I's, and I think the mayor would do an excellent job as governor.
Very good, thank you.
And I'm not just saying because I know the crowd. I really believe that. Angel, my wife was there for when Farrah was born at the hospital. Not in the room, but she was there for. She's a CNA member of SEIU over at Women and Infants. Is a translator and a CNA, and she does a heck of a job. So.
All right. Well, thanks for coming.
Thanks,
Good question.
I did put your website on the email that I sent out. It's
Great.
also on the Facebook site, but if you'd like to put that on the board again. that would be
Sure.
great.
And if there's an email address you want people to use, get in touch with your campaign.
And if you're looking for volunteers from Chepachet, let me know.
Oh, thank you. I love Chepachet.
I think you just recruited someone.
Excuse my handwriting.
It's okay, you're using SEIU purple. Just forgive
And would you also like to be on our email list?
I'm on your email
You're
list.
on your
I get your
email
emails all the time. That's how I knew your name.